How do you know spirituality is missing from the workplace?
Thank you for asking this question. It's a very important question, and I do want to address it from a few different ways. One thing that we have having a secular lifestyle that we have, the world has been moving outside the traditional patterns, and so we know that spirituality is missing because people are actually starting to be more stressed and they feel emptier. So there is some shining examples of where spirituality has come back into the workplace, and there are people, like, it usually depends on the leader, and I as I work in leadership, I can tell you that it is the leader that brings this aspect, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a particular religion or a particular practice, yet it is apparent that spirituality is missing when we are in their victim mode. You see people that are very upset, you see people who are very stressed, you see people who are thinking about very much what we call this 3D world without realizing that there's something more. So they feel empty and they feel stressed. Usually those are the indicators that we know that there's something missing.
What I see with a lot of business people is that they've been in their careers for 15, 20, 25 years. They've got the house, they've got the car, they've got the relationship, they've got the education, and they're holding it all together so tightly. And it's like as if they just take their hands off the reins for a moment, everything's going to fall apart. And I see that. And I really agree with what you're saying here is there's a sense of emptiness. And sometimes that emptiness comes across as, what is all of this for? Why am I getting up at 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning? Why am I commuting 2 and 3 hours a day? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And maybe somewhere between age 35 and 45, they start to try to figure it out. And if the leader's not bringing spirituality into the workplace, how could they expect to practice spirituality in the workplace?
Mm. All right, so let me address this in two parts. The first part is that in Western society, and even now here in Asia, because we are very much westernizing, the secular society has been in place. And so it is, we have these marks: get a degree, get a job, have children, get a promotion. And because those are hard and they take years, we check the boxes. We're like, well, something's missing, but we need the next step. So something's, well, it's because I don't have a really nice job yet. Something missing is because I'm not married yet. Something missing is because I don't have the children yet. And then when they get all this, and as you said, it's usually at age 35 to 45, even 55, but usually that age is when people feel that now, okay, I've done it all. I've gotten there. Now what? And that's the question that starts the inquiry. And in that question, it's a very loaded question, because the now what, one of my mentors said, the why is a very big question for a single human to answer. So we answer usually, and so they start asking the question, why am I doing this? Why am I here? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? So they start to realize that those society checkpoints that were guided path up to that point are gone. And actually, so the earlier they hit their success and the stride, the earlier they hit their stride, that's the earlier they ask the question. Yet everybody will ask that question. We call it often the midlife crisis. We often call it the so I see in that age, in that stage, people usually quit their jobs or change their careers, or they change companies, like, or they start a new business, like something has to change. And yeah, like in the traditional way, like people just, we always hear about this guy who hit the midlife crisis. He's buying the motorcycle and like the leather suit and going out to bike, which is absolutely not what he wanted. But he's looking for the exciting, for the something more. And for women, it's they may go through divorce, they may make some issues, but all of us are trying to find something. What is that one thing that will make things right? Because they know that something's wrong, but they can't quite place it. And now let me answer the second part of your questions. Well, what if the leader does it? Guess what? You can do it for yourself, and it starts with you. Leadership is first of all self-leadership. And what I mean by that is that everything you do is really changing yourself. In the Tao Te Ching, one of my favorite books, it explains that as we look at things, the things we look at change. So change happens internally first, and then we see it reflected on the outside. People stress, when they're overwhelmed, when they're fearing burnout, is because they're doing the same thing over and over again, and there's no passion, there's no purpose. We are funny creatures, humans, because on one side we're looking for security, and on the other side we're looking for uncertainty and adventure. So we have these contradictory goals and terms that are both valid. Those are real needs. So usually what I say to my clients is, let's make an agreement. There's two areas in your life where we don't want too much drama, and that's going to be income. So like how you sustain yourself and your family, because, or at least your close relationship, because really, why do you want to have drama there? And let's create the sense of adventure, of uncertainty, growth somewhere else. And more than that, we are here. I believe we're here for purpose, and our purpose is calling us. What I usually say is that wherever we are seeking is causing us to seek. So it's almost as if we're saying, where are you? And it's like, I'm over here, where are you? So we're calling each other, and that is what ultimately we're here to create, what you're here to do, and what will help us be fulfilled. The funny thing about us, humans, is that when we hit that point of balance, when we hit that point where we found what we're here to do, well, guess what? That's when we feel happy, that's when everything flows, that's when we're satisfied, and stress disappears, because we're no longer pushing ourselves, it's pulling us. And this is the magical thing. And I'm going to answer your next question, which you haven't asked yet, which is, how do you do this? And it can be pretty simple. It's with practices. And I like to talk about the yin yang. Okay, go ahead.
Let me come take one step back. In business, the goal is to measure everything. Management measures everything. What did we do in the past? The entrepreneur says, what are we going to do in the future? And as we move towards those financial goals, we can tick the boxes. Okay, income's going up 1,000, a million, 10 million. We've made 50 sales, 500 sales. We can measure that. When people apply for jobs, we can measure their personality styles. We can measure their disc style. We can measure their motivators. We can measure their Hartman profile and how they make decisions. And these are things that we can do with science. And people in business, they love science. They love things that they can measure. We say it in leadership, what gets measured gets done. But how do you measure in a piece? How do we measure it so we know that there's a certain level there without being confused? Because, hey, is it invisible or is it visible?
Absolutely. And um, let me continue what I was saying, because I was going there. Don't worry. I wanted to bring the concepts of the yin yang because I always say that the yang is the hard part. So if you think of a river, the river of life, as it were, the river of your business, the river of going, the river bed, which is the systems and processes, the ROIs, the KPIs, whatever you put in place to measure, because the riverbed will give a direction. And what is inside is the flow. And when you're asking the question, almost asking, I'm going to answer it's not exactly oranges, but it's really two separate parts of the way things flow, the way. Have you ever been in a moment or in a place you just meet the right people at the right time, and you just have the right opportunities, and somebody says something, you're like, oh my God, I was looking for that. How did you know? So this magic, if you want that, this ineffable quality. It's just it, and it's just as impossible as the KPIs. And the reason I'm saying that is because I'm a very practical person. Even though I speak about spirituality, I'm very grounded in this earth, and I like the 3D world. And what I do is creating results in the 3D world. It's not about, because we're in business. In business, it's business to make money. If we're not making money, we're out of business. I don't care how fluffy and happy you are. If you want to stay in business, first and foremost, you need to make money. Yet, what I'm saying is that what we call the flow is actually an accelerator in making money. It's solving odds you may have, and you don't even know how. This is the funny thing. We have to give up something to gain something. And we literally have to give up full control over the how it's going to happen. And so we can set intentions, we can have a direction, we can have measurable things that we track, but really the part that we get go of is the control of all the steps in between. So it's almost like we stop micromanaging life, micromanaging the process. So we always complain about these people who micromanage. Why? Because there's no way to micromanage. It's sort of like, oh my God, I need to control everything and let me micromanage, because if anything goes outside my control, it's going to go wrong. Well, guess what? That slows you down. So you have to put in place those markers, as we were saying, the KPIs, the ROIs, whatever needs to be in place for the business to function. The SOPs, those are things that are necessary because they become automatic. And in the age that we're in, the age of AI, the tools that we have at our disposal are becoming better and better. And so things that used to be very inefficient are becoming more and more efficient. The ease of efficiency, though, should not take away from the fact that at the end of the day, as self-leadership or in leadership, we are the ones who create the results. So if you're not the one who's in charge, if you're not of yourself first, then it goes apart. It's almost like this idea that we're in our center, and from our center we can pick and choose. Because if we're outside that center, things seem really fast, things get very stressful, and we fall down. So that's why it's important to just come back.
For the way that the world is moving now, and I agree with this AI technology, things that used to take me a week to do, I can now do in a day. Things that used to take me an entire day, I can have done in a matter of minutes. And I even know internally that my peace of mind does shift. How it used to be was I would get fulfillment from always being busy. However, now that the busyness has disappeared, I've got to dealing with the rising guilt that says, Daniel, you should be busy. You should be doing more. You've got white space in the calendar. That's the devil. So, what place does spirituality have in the future of business?
And I love how you mentioned busyness, because I always tell people, let's stop the busyness and being business. When you have a goal, it doesn't have to be difficult. So I'll bring an example of one. So big time CEO, big company, big construction. So these people are building skyscrapers, and he had the same attitude than you. He said, well, I need to be busy to make sure that things are happening. And I'm like, no. What if we go? but I'm like, let's prioritize. Let's look at what is actually important. So this is work that only you can do, and for yourself, and not even your manager or superior, or if you have no manager or superior, definitely nobody can do it for you. But seriously, in your business, this is part of the work that we always do. So I always do as a consultant. Is let's look at what you're producing and what is actually important for this production. And your production could be a product, a physical product, could be a service, it could anything that you do that you create value with. And that's where you start when you're looking at those priorities. Because the only thing that matters in your business is not for you to clock hours. That's like an efficient way. What matters is for you to say what needs to be done. what has to be done for this production, for this service, for this teaching, whatever you're doing, to go along, to move forward. And when you measure, you say, how do you measure spirituality? Well, you don't necessarily measure spirituality, you measure the effects. So if you're doing things right on the spiritual level, and if you're, and I mean that as in, it's still a discipline. What you can measure, for example, is like how many hours per day are you spending in those softer, ineffable topics, right? Or how did you make it a priority? So let's use a 3D example, which will be easier to explain. So if you want to have bigger muscles, you have to go to the gym. Nobody can do your push-ups for you. And if you don't go, well, but you're not. And it's not today. It's not like, oh my God, today I'm gonna go and like do like 1,000 push-ups, and tomorrow I'm gonna, no. Tomorrow you're gonna be in bed and crying pain. Today you do a little bit, tomorrow you do a little bit more, and before you know it, eventually you get there. So as a woman, I'm not very strong in my upper body, and I love swimming. So I wanted to jump out of the pool, and I can do it. Of course, but in the deep end, no. And so I decided I'm gonna build my muscles. So I started with like doing weights in the pool, and floaters and weights, and little by little, beginning I got all the way to the point where I got up and then I'll fall back in. So it took me maybe 2 months to get to that point where I just jump out. And it's amazing. It feels amazing. But it didn't happen overnight. And that's the thing I want to say. In those practices that we do for self-care, for spirituality, for inner peace, they don't get you results overnight either. This is not something, well, okay, well, I did my 15 minutes of meditation, so I am now spiritual. That's not what happened. Yeah, that there thing that and I always like to explain. So I have a method that I call Empower, which is the method I teach about creating extraordinary results in your business. And that method has 4 steps. The 4 steps is intention. So where do you want to go? Clearing, which is letting go, and it can be letting go of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual matters. But we have to. Then we have the gratitude, and gratitude is strong because when you let go, it's almost like you have a lot of extra space, and you get to fill it in with something. And gratitude is the easy one to realize. It will get you higher. And the last step is trust and faith that it's arriving, because most people want things. They want more income, they want more results, they want to increase their clients numbers, whatever they want this. And we need to measure not the end only, but lots of steps in between. One of the things I love in sales is activity-based selling. When I was taught sales way back when, it was all about the results. How much money did you make? Well, if we measure money, we are missing everything in between, because there's events that happen. There's relationships that are being built. There is a progression in this. So since I shifted into activity-based selling, my business is much easier to manage and hold. And I just had a client in China mainland, where she was like, she had started her business, was making no money, and then within 1 month she closed K. She was like, we had set a 3-month goal, ambitious, of $300,000, and a measure in US dollars. And she was scared. She's like, I don't know if I can do it. And I said, okay, let's set a minimum goal of 10,000, a target of 20, and a maximum of 30, or an ideal, right? And then we stopped worrying about that. We said, okay, now let's do the steps there. Well, guess what? She started doing the steps, and she disappeared for a week, and then I met her in our meeting, and she said, I think I did better than the maximum. I said, okay, and then we calculated 100K, almost like 98, but close enough, right? And it was like, okay, you did it. And she's like, what's next? I'm like, well, first let's get you stabilized, and then let's go to the next level. But I'm like, why not have your first year be $1 million year? There's nothing wrong with money, but it starts with stabilizing. It starts with being in your center. It starts with doing the activity and getting to reward yourself and accept that it's about the steps. It's not about going from 0 to 100. It's all the steps in between get to be accepted and taken care of, because those steps are what is going to get you to 100. And super successful people tend to be overachievers, and I'm going to speak from knowing, because I used to be an overachiever amongst overachievers, and I burned out. And this is a real danger. When we don't take care of our balance of our body, well, we get out of balance, and that usually very often manifests as disease or problems or family problems. When I was in business school, one thing that they told us is that you guys are going to do well financially, but you're all going to be divorced, because statistics show that 90% of MBAs will get right. And it was kind of like a fact, and I was like, why? Why do we have to assume that this is going to be our? We have to assume that we cannot have it all balanced. And this is like the important thing that I want to. When we think about our life, our careers, it doesn't have to be a trade-off. It's not either or. What if it was yes and? What if it was both? And that comes only when we balance what I call the yin and the yang, the softer things with the things, the process with the energy and the flow. So that is where I get it all, truly.
One of the ways that I know that I have spirituality in business is when I have peace of mind, and especially in the area of selling. I know that when I go into selling and I'm outcome independent, then I know I have peace of mind, and that's my spirituality. I can go and talk to a customer, explore what they want, explore what they need, and even get all the way to the end of the sales process. And even if the client doesn't purchase, I've still done what I've loved to do. And that whole process isn't defined, and I don't define myself based on somebody saying yes or no. And I learned that by being outcome independent, detached from the outcome, was good for my mental and emotional health. But it also brings in that spiritual element into my world, which for me, I can measure. It's not something I can measure on a clock, I can't measure on a spreadsheet, but I know internally. I know because my self talk is much more positive, it's much more supportive. I know the pictures that I hold in my mind are of what I want, not of what I don't want. That gut instinct talks, and instead of saying, shut up, you listen to it and say, yes. And I know that when I'm feeling spiritual, when I have that peace of mind, I'm listening internally. And I know it has some big advantages for me. But I'd like to think broader. What are 2 or 3 advantages of spirituality for business people this year?
And I do want to bring one concept here, and this is something I learned from a man named Morishita, and he said this, and when he said it, I was like, oh my God, it changed my mind. He said, move from scared sales to sacred sales. And I was like, what does that even mean? What I've come to realize that scared is, oh my God, I'm so scared I have to make my quota. And sacred sales is about giving value. So when I do sales now, I concentrate constantly how values. My sales is not about getting someone, it's giving. It's about giving, and that's a very spiritual concept. We are constantly giving, knowing that, and I'm sure you've seen this infinity sign. So knowing that everything's a flow. So the more we give, the more we receive. And it might come from these people or someone else, it doesn't matter. We keep giving.